My name is Tom, and for the last 14 years, I genuinely believed I had the perfect life. Laura and I shared a beautiful two-story home on Maple Avenue, tucked in a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and rivers that wound their way through the landscape. Our town felt like something out of an old postcard. Everyone greeted each other by name, and keeping secrets wasn't easy with so many familiar faces around. I worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, which meant I was on the road often, sometimes for days at a stretch. Laura, who had once been a dedicated schoolteacher, chose to become a homemaker after our wedding, pouring her heart into turning our house into a warm, welcoming space. Our home was her pride, a place where every corner was carefully tended and the garden outside bloomed under her attentive care. Life was comfortable, marked by the easy rhythms that come with years of companionship and routine. Laura and I had made the mutual decision early on to forego having children. That choice allowed us the freedom to travel on a whim, to focus on ourselves, and to enjoy life at a pace that suited us. Our friends admired what they saw as a picture of harmony, often commenting on how well we seemed to understand each other. They tell me how lucky I was, how rare it was to find a bond like ours. But harmony, I've come to learn, can be deceiving. Sometimes it's the quiet, the unspoken moments that hide the deepest truths. And as I was soon to discover, my seemingly flawless life was resting on a foundation of lies. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, the kind of thing you sense but can't quite put your finger on. Laura had always been particular about her appearance, but now it was like she'd become hyper-aware. I'd come back from one of my trips to find her dressed up, makeup flawless, even when she didn't have plans or anywhere special to be. Her wardrobe shifted gradually, trading in comfortable clothes for outfits that were a touch more elegant, even revealing, as if she had somewhere or someone special in mind. Then there was her phone. Once upon a time, Laura would leave it lying around the house without a second thought. But recently, it was always with her. And when a message would pop up, she'd turn away to read it, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed oddly private, as if the joy in her eyes wasn't meant for me. I tried to brush off the nagging doubt, dismissing it as paranoia from spending too much time on the road. But the unease grew, eating away at my peace. Our conversations, once easy and endless, had become stilted. Laura seemed to drift when I talked, her responses vague, her attention elsewhere. Nights used to be filled with laughter, sharing stories and inside jokes that only we understood, but now silence stretched between us. Our intimacy dwindled until it was barely there, replaced by a weighty, uneasy stillness. Then came the evening that set everything in motion. I had just returned from a long trip, tired but glad to be home. Laura had been out that day, and when she came back, there was something strange about her, an anxious, almost jumpy energy I couldn't ignore. Her excuses about where she'd been didn't quite add up, and the feeling gnawed at me that something wasn't right. From then on, I started watching more closely, paying attention to the small things I might have once overlooked. It wasn't long before I began noticing signs. There were unfamiliar charges on our credit card, dinners at fancy restaurants, and small, costly items she'd clearly bought but had never given to me. Her outings grew more frequent, too, always under the guise of seeing some new friend or catching up with an old acquaintance whose name I hadn't heard before. One night, she told me she was heading to a book club meeting. Normally, I'd barely think twice about it, but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist with suspicion. Once she left, I got in my car, feeling ridiculous but driven by a need to know. I decided to follow her. The address she'd given me led me to a quiet street across town. I parked at a distance and waited, watching. Soon enough, I saw her get into a car with a man I didn't recognize. They looked comfortable together, laughing and talking as if they'd known each other for years. My heart sank, a cold realization settling in. I couldn't deny it any longer. There was something deeply wrong, and the woman I thought I knew better than anyone was hiding a part of her life from me. The seeds of doubt had taken root, and I knew I couldn't ignore them. I had to face the truth, even if it shattered everything I believed in. Determined, I committed myself to finding out what was really happening, no matter how painful the answers might be. So I began keeping track of Laura's movements, watching, listening, gathering pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to solve. It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. The need to know the truth was too strong, pushing me into a relentless search that would uncover secrets I wasn't ready to face. One afternoon, while Laura was out running errands, she left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I hesitated, staring at the device, feeling an unsettling mixture of curiosity and guilt gnawing at me. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, the familiar passcode lingering in my mind. I'd memorized it long ago, but never had I thought I'd use it this way. A pang of shame twisted in my chest, but the need to know the truth drowned out every other feeling. I navigated to her messages, my breath catching as I sifted through her conversations. Most were innocent, casual chats with friends and family. But then, buried among the others, was a thread with a name that sent a chill through me. Adam. My blood ran cold as I scrolled, each message pulling me deeper into a nightmare I hadn't wanted to believe. "I can't wait to see you tonight," one message read, and I felt my heart drop, the words echoing in my mind. Another message made my stomach churn. "Last night was amazing." I couldn't look away, even as a hollow ache filled my chest. I kept reading, uncovering explicit photos, words of love, and their plans to meet again. With every detail, the full extent of Laura's betrayal unfolded before me, and the reality was almost too much to bear. That night, I wanted to confront Laura with everything I had discovered, but something held me back. I needed more than words on a screen. I needed proof that would lay everything bare. Desperation drove me to set up a small camera in our bedroom, carefully disguising it among the clutter on the shelf. It was a line I never thought I'd cross, but I had to see for myself what was happening under my own roof. A few days later, I had a work trip, one that required me to be away overnight. I told Laura I'd be gone, hoping it would give her the chance she seemed so eager for. As I drove away from the house, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, twisting tighter with each mile. I parked a few blocks away and waited, letting time crawl by as evening approached. Eventually, I crept back to the house, slipping quietly through the back door and making my way to the small room next to our bedroom. I settled there, hidden, barely daring to breathe. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every sound, every distant footstep made my heart race. And then, finally, I heard the front door open, followed by the soft murmur of voices. My pulse thundered in my ears as Laura and Adam entered the bedroom, completely oblivious to my presence just a few feet away. Through a small gap in the door, I watched in horrified silence as they embraced, their laughter soft and intimate. Clothes fell to the floor with quiet thuds, and they lowered themselves onto our bed. My bed, the place where Laura and I had shared so many memories, so much of our life together. Watching them there, the reality of her betrayal hit me like a tidal wave, anger and heartbreak crashing over me with unbearable force. Unable to stand it another moment, I threw the door open, my voice raw with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" Laura and Adam sprang apart, their faces a mix of shock and fear as they scrambled for their clothes. Laura grabbed a sheet, clutching it around herself, her face pale. "Tom, I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Explain?" I shouted, the word slicing through the tension in the room. "Explain what? That you've been cheating on me? In our own home? With him?" I pointed to Adam, who was fumbling with his shirt, his gaze darting around as if searching for a quick escape. "Tom, please. It's not what it looks like," she pleaded, her eyes wide and filling with tears. But her words felt hollow. Too little too late. "Save it, Laura. I've seen the messages. I've seen everything," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "How long has this been going on?" She looked away, shame written across her face, her shoulders slumped. "A few months," she finally admitted, barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I never meant for it to go this far." Adam, now fully dressed, took a few steps toward the door, as if he could slip away unnoticed. But I wasn't about to let him off that easily. "You're not going anywhere," I growled, grabbing him by the collar. forcing him to face me. You're going to explain yourself, too. He held his hands up defensively, his eyes wide with fear. Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was married. He lied, his gaze shifting nervously. Don't lie to me, I roared, shoving him back with all the anger I could muster. Get out of my house. Now. He didn't need to be told twice. Adam bolted for the door, leaving Laura and me alone in the room, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us like a storm. Laura stood there, clutching the sheet around her, her face streaked with tears, the once familiar warmth in her eyes replaced by guilt and regret. And in that moment, I realized that whatever we'd once had was slipping away, the trust and love we'd built shattered, lying in pieces between us. Tom, I'm sorry, Laura whispered, her voice barely holding together. Her words hung in the air, as hollow as the apology she tried to offer. She stood there, clutching the sheet around herself, as if it could somehow shield her from the reality she'd created. I took a deep breath, struggling to steady myself, but the weight of her betrayal pressed down harder with each passing second. It's too late for apologies, Laura. You've destroyed everything we had, I replied, my voice thick with the ache of shattered trust. There was no salvaging what we'd once had. It was all broken beyond repair, and it was her hand that had taken it apart. After Adam bolted out of the house, leaving behind nothing but shame in his wake, I turned my full attention to Laura. She trembled, gripping the sheet as if it might protect her from the storm she had unleashed. I could barely look at her, barely recognize the woman standing before me. How could you, Laura? I asked, the rawness in my voice betraying the pain I'd tried to contain. How could you betray me like this, in our own home? She looked back at me, her face streaked with tears. Tom, I didn't mean for it to happen, she murmured, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. It just did. I was lonely. You were always gone, and Adam was there for me. Lonely, I spat, the word thick with bitterness. You think that justifies cheating on me here in our bed? With him? She flinched, but I couldn't stop. My anger had taken hold, demanding answers I wasn't sure I wanted. How long, Laura? How long have you been lying to me? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor as she tried to gather the words. It started about 6 months ago, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. We reconnected at a school reunion. At first, it was just talking, catching up. Her words trailed off, and she took a shaky breath before continuing. But then it became more. More, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. You mean you started sleeping with him? Tom, please, she begged, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you. I really do. But I was so lonely, and Adam made me feel wanted. Her words cut deep, the implications twisting the knife she'd already plunged into me. The betrayal was too raw, too consuming. Love, I scoffed, gesturing wildly toward the bed, the very place she'd shattered everything we'd built. You call this love, Laura? This isn't love. This is betrayal. This is deceit. She broke down, sinking to the floor, her sobs filling the room. I know, Tom. I know. I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to end like this. My heart hammered with a rage and sadness I'd never known. Then why did you do it? I demanded. Why did you lie to me? Why didn't you come to me if you were feeling lonely? I searched her face for answers, for any sign of the woman I thought I knew. I tried, Tom, she whispered. I tried to tell you, but you were always so busy, always away for work. And when you were home, you were distant. I felt invisible. I shook my head, my mind reeling. So you thought being with someone else was the answer? That this was the solution? I could barely contain my disgust. No, she whispered, defeated. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you. I was weak, and I made a terrible mistake. A mistake? I echoed, the words sounding hollow. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was a choice, a deliberate decision to betray me. We sat in silence, her sobs quieting as the weight of her actions hung heavy in the air. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the pain had taken the anger, twisting it into something deeper, colder. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper, drained yet resolute. I don't know if I can forgive you, Laura. You've broken something inside me, something I don't know how to fix. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, desperate for a second chance. Please, Tom, give me a chance to make it right. I love you. I want to make this work. I stood, feeling hollow and exhausted. I need time to think. I need space to process this. I can't be around you right now. She nodded, defeated, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I understand. I'll go stay with my sister for a while. She grabbed a few things, her hands trembling, and slowly walked to the door. Just before stepping out, she looked back one last time, her voice thick with regret. Please, Tom, don't give up on us. The door closed behind her, the sound final, echoing through the empty house. I stood there, alone in the silence, before finally sinking onto the bed, the weight of her betrayal pressing down, heavy and suffocating. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed Laura's departure, the house felt emptier than ever. I wandered from room to room, each space a painful reminder of what we'd once shared. I took time off work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything but the betrayal that gnawed at me like a constant ache, simmering under the surface. As the rage grew, I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to do something to make Laura feel even a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on me. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the deception, the blatant disregard she'd shown for everything we'd built. I wanted her to hurt, to feel the regret of every stolen moment she'd spent with Adam. The first step was clear. I needed more evidence. I needed proof, something that would leave no doubt, no room for her to twist the truth. And so, I began gathering everything I could, piecing together a case that would show her the damage she'd done. Determined to piece together the full extent of Laura's betrayal, I plunged into her emails and social media accounts, uncovering messages and photos that left no room for doubt. Every word, every image told the story in harsh, undeniable clarity. I compiled everything into a neat, damning dossier, a collection of evidence that would make it impossible for her to deny or downplay her actions. I wanted her to face the full weight of what she'd done. With my mind set on exposing the truth, I reached out to our closest friends. Laura and I had always been part of a tight-knit group, people we had shared countless memories with. I knew that revealing her betrayal would send shockwaves through our circle, that her reputation would take a devastating hit. I began with those I trusted most, those who would be both shocked and disgusted by what she had done. Hey, it's Tom. I began each conversation, keeping my voice steady. I need to talk to you about something serious. Laura has been having an affair. The responses varied. Some were struck silent. Others immediately expressed their anger or disbelief. But each reaction added fuel to the fire I had started. As I shared pieces of the evidence with them, the news spread quickly. Soon, friends who had once held Laura in high regard turned away from her, and her once strong support system began to crumble. But that wasn't enough. I felt the need to make her actions known beyond our circle, to expose the truth for everyone to see. Using an anonymous account, I took to social media, posting carefully selected excerpts from the dossier, tagging Laura and Adam directly. I made sure the posts were visible to everyone in our town, adding screenshots of their messages, explicit photos, and detailed snippets of their plans. Each post was calculated to reveal the full extent of their betrayal. The response was immediate and brutal. People who had once admired Laura now saw her for who she truly was. Comments flooded in, expressing disappointment, disgust, and even anger. But for me, it still wasn't enough. I needed to confront Adam directly, to make him feel the weight of his actions in a way he'd never forget. After some digging, I found out where he worked, a small family-owned hardware store in town. The next morning, I drove over, my anger sharp and fresh. I found him chatting casually with a customer when I entered. Hey, Adam, I called out, making my voice loud enough to echo through the store. He turned, and the color drained from his face as soon as he saw me. Tom, he stammered, trying to find the right words, but I wasn't interested in anything he had to say. Save it, I said, stepping closer, my voice low and dangerous. You thought you could just walk into my life, destroy everything I built, and walk away without a single consequence? Silence fell over the store as customers turned to watch the scene unfold. Adam glanced around, his expression turning desperate as he realized there was nowhere to hide. I didn't know she was married, he offered weakly, but I shook my head, barely containing the rage surging inside me. Don't lie to me, I snapped. You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you're going to pay for it. Without a second thought, I grabbed a nearby can of paint from the shelf. In one swift motion, I hurled it at him, watching as it burst open on impact, splattering him with thick, white paint. He stumbled backward, trying to wipe the paint from his face, but it was too late. The damage was done, his humiliation complete. Next time you think about screwing someone else's wife, remember this, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. You don't mess with me. Leaving the store, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a start. As I drove home, I wondered how Laura would react when she heard about Adam's public humiliation. Part of me hoped it would make her realize just how deeply she'd hurt me. But another part knew it wouldn't change anything. Nothing could fix what she had broken. When I got home, I saw a message waiting on my phone from Laura. She must have found out about the social media posts because she was begging me to take them down. Please, Tom, she'd written. This is destroying me. I'm begging you. I stared at her message, feeling a momentary pang of what might have once been sympathy, but it quickly faded, replaced by a hardened resolve. I typed back, you destroyed us first. Now you can deal with the consequences. With that, I blocked her number, tossing my phone onto the couch. The anger still simmered, the pain still raw, but for the first time, I felt a sense of control. Laura had shattered my world, but I wasn't going to let her leave me in ruins. I would rebuild, piece by painful piece, and I'd make sure she'd never forget the cost of her betrayal. The weeks following my public revenge were a chaotic blend of emotions. Laura's social media accounts quickly became a battleground, with comments flooding in from people on both sides. Those who were disgusted by her betrayal and others shocked by the steps I had taken to expose her. While I felt a grim satisfaction in seeing the truth laid bare, there was an emptiness inside me that revenge couldn't fill. The anger and pain persisted, refusing to fade. Deep down, I knew I needed to confront her one last time, to have a final conversation that might offer closure to this painful chapter of my life. Laura had been staying with her sister since she left the house, and when I called to set up a meeting, she agreed, albeit reluctantly. I think she sensed that this was something we both needed to face. We chose a neutral place, a quiet park where we'd often walked together in happier times. When I arrived, I saw her already seated on a bench by the pond, her shoulders slouched, her face pale and drawn. The woman who had once seemed so full of life now appeared as a hollow version of herself, her vibrancy dulled by the weight of what she had done. I walked over slowly, each step heavy with memories of what we once had. I sat down beside her, and for a few moments, we were both silent, the air thick with tension and unspoken words. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. Tom, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. I nodded, swallowing hard. I wasn't ready to speak. The anger and betrayal still felt too raw, too fresh. After a moment, I forced myself to look at her, my voice trembling. Why, Laura? I managed, the words tearing out of me. Why did you do it? She took a deep breath, her eyes welling with tears. I wish I had a simple answer, Tom. I was lonely. I felt neglected. Adam made me feel wanted alive. Her voice cracked, and she looked down, her fingers twisting together nervously. But it was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough, I replied, the anger flaring back up, igniting all the pain I'd tried to bury. You didn't just cheat on me. You betrayed everything we built together, everything we promised each other. You lied to me, to our friends. You tore our life apart. She wiped at her tears, nodding miserably. I know I did, she whispered, and I hate myself for it. But Tom, you have to understand, it wasn't just about you being away for work. It was about us. She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. We, we were drifting apart long before Adam came into the picture. I clenched my fists, struggling to hold my composure. So it's my fault now? I demanded, my voice rising. Because I worked hard to provide for us? To give us the life we wanted? No, no, she said quickly, shaking her head. I'm not blaming you. I'm trying to explain. We both stopped trying. We let the distance grow, and I didn't know how to bridge it. Bridge it? I scoffed, bitterness lacing my words. You could have talked to me, Laura. We could have tried counseling, anything, but instead, you chose to sleep with someone else. My harsh words made her flinch, but she didn't argue. You're right, she whispered, her voice small. I should have handled it differently. I was weak, and I gave in to temptation. And now I'm paying the price. I looked away, my gaze drifting to the ducks gliding across the pond. Their calm movements felt surreal, contrasting starkly with the storm raging inside me. So what happens now? I asked quietly, more to myself than to her. Where do we go from here? Her voice was pleading when she answered. I want to try to fix this, Tom. I want to go to counseling, to do whatever it takes to make things right. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. I let out a bitter laugh. It's a little late for that, don't you think? You've already lost me, Laura. The trust is gone, and I don't know if it can ever be rebuilt. She reached out to touch my hand, her fingers trembling, but I pulled away. Please, Tom, she whispered, her desperation evident. Give me a chance. Give us a chance. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer, feeling suffocated by her pleas and the memories they dredged up. I can't, Laura. I can't keep living with this pain. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I took a steadying breath, the words coming easier than I'd expected. I want a divorce. Her face crumpled as she gasped, shock and devastation filling her eyes. No, Tom, please don't do this. We can fix it. I know we can. I shook my head, my own vision blurring with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Laura, but there's no going back. I need to move on. We both do. Her quiet sobs filled the silence around us, echoing off the trees and empty benches. She looked at me, her face streaked with tears, her voice choked with heartbreak. I love you, Tom. I always will. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. Goodbye, Laura, I said softly, my voice carrying the finality of the choice I had made. I walked away, leaving her there with the shattered remnants of our life scattered around us like fallen leaves. As I made my way back to my car, a strange mix of relief and sorrow settled over me. I had finally closed the door on this chapter of my life, but the path ahead was unclear, shadowed by pain and uncertainty. And yet, for the first time, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope, a hope that one day I would be able to rebuild, piece by piece, and find peace amidst the wreckage she had left behind. The confrontation at the park had been brutal, an emotional battle that left me drained, but it was a step I needed to take. As painful as it was, facing Laura one last time was the beginning of my journey toward healing, toward breaking free from the weight of betrayal that had hung over me. The road ahead would be difficult and filled with uncertainties, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. Deciding to divorce Laura was agonizing, but it was the only way I could see to truly move forward. Filing the papers was straightforward enough, especially with all the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer, David, was efficient and empathetic, guiding me through each step. But the trial, well, that was something else entirely. The court process became a battlefield, dredging up memories I would have preferred to bury. On the morning of the trial, I dressed in my best suit, trying to embody a calm, composed exterior. Inside, though, I was a storm of emotions barely contained. I arrived at the courthouse early, and David was there to meet me, his confidence and steady words easing my nerves, if only a little. Shortly after, Laura arrived, accompanied by her attorney. She looked exhausted, her face drawn and her eyes red and puffy from crying. Despite everything, seeing her like that still tugged at my heart. But I reminded myself that I had to stay strong, that I couldn't afford to let my emotions cloud my judgment or weaken my resolve. The trial began with opening statements, each side laying out their case. David presented the evidence of Laura's affair, arguing for a fair division of assets and for me to retain custody of our house. He was poised and articulate, keeping the focus on the facts and the impact her actions had wrought. Then it was Laura's lawyer's turn. He tried to frame her as a lonely, neglected wife driven to infidelity by my constant absences and supposed emotional detachment. It was difficult to listen, hearing my life and efforts painted as a series of failures. But I knew it was all part of their strategy, and I held myself together, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. When Laura took the stand, her voice was thick with emotion, her testimony a mixture of regret and rationalizations. She admitted to the affair, but emphasized her feelings of loneliness and isolation, claiming she'd felt invisible, like she was merely a shadow in her own marriage. Her lawyer handled her with a gentle touch, leading her to paint herself as a tragic figure who had made a terrible mistake. She cast frequent glances in my direction, tears spilling over as she spoke, but I kept my gaze steady, unwilling to let myself be swayed by the emotions that had once bound us. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and walked to the witness stand, where David waited to guide me through. His questions were steady and focused, helping me stay anchored in the facts rather than the torrent of emotions welling inside me. I recounted the events leading up to my discovery of the affair, describing the gradual changes I had noticed, the mounting suspicions, and finally, the devastating evidence I had uncovered. I spoke about the impact it had on me, on my sense of trust, on the very foundation of my life. During cross-examination, Laura's lawyer attempted to undermine my credibility, honing in on my absences and dedication to my career. He implied that my long work hours were a contributing factor to Laura's actions, casting doubt on my commitment to the marriage. But I stayed calm, repeating the simple truth. I had worked hard to provide for us, and I had believed that our marriage was strong enough to withstand those challenges. I never imagined that Laura would betray me like this, in the very home we had built together. The hardest part of the trial came when our mutual friends were called as witnesses. They took the stand reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the position they'd been put in. They spoke about the gradual changes they had seen in Laura, the secrecy, the private messages, and the distance she had begun to keep. They confirmed that I had confided in them, showing them the messages and photos that left no room for doubt. It was painful to watch, seeing how deeply our betrayal had impacted those around us, how the cracks in our relationship had sent shockwaves through our social circle. After days filled with testimony, evidence, and endless arguments, the trial finally drew to a close. The courtroom settled into a tense silence as the judge reviewed everything, his expression stern and unreadable. I could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that the decision he was about to make would determine the course of my life. In those last few moments, I realized just how deeply this entire ordeal had changed me. The man who had walked into this marriage so many years ago had been trusting, optimistic, and willing to give his all. But the man sitting here now was someone different, someone hardened by betrayal, yet somehow still standing, still moving forward. As we awaited the judge's decision, I cast one final glance at Laura. Her face was downturned, her shoulders slumped, her entire demeanor one of regret and sorrow. But I felt no sympathy left to give, only a quiet resolve to reclaim my life and rebuild it from the ruins she had left behind. We sat in strained silence, the weight of the moment pressing down as the judge began to speak. "The court finds that the evidence of infidelity is clear and compelling," he declared, his tone formal yet final. "Given the circumstances, I am awarding the marital home to Tom Adams." A surge of relief coursed through me, mingling with a bittersweet ache. This house had once been a symbol of the life Laura and I had built together, but now, as the judge granted it to me alone, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of what we had once shared. The judge continued, "Mrs. Laura Adams will receive a fair share of the remaining assets, as determined by the financial records submitted." As his words sank in, Laura burst into tears. I watched her, feeling a complex mix of relief and sorrow. It was officially over. The life we had built together was now irrevocably dismantled, piece by painful piece. As we left the courtroom, Laura approached me, her face blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed. "Tom, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to end like this." I nodded, too drained to say much. "I know, Laura," I managed quietly. "But it's over now. We both need to move on." David placed a steady hand on my shoulder as we walked out of the courthouse. "You did well in there," he said, his voice filled with calm reassurance. "It's never easy, but you handled it with dignity." "Thanks, David," I replied, my voice hollow. I felt like a shell of myself, emptied out by the process, but there was a glimmer of hope, of starting anew. I just want to start over. And so I did. Moving back into the house alone was strange at first. Each room held memories of what had once been, echoes of a life we'd shared. But I knew I had to reclaim it, to make it my own. I threw myself into redecorating, repainting the walls, and replacing the furniture. Slowly, the house transformed from a painful reminder of betrayal into a place that represented my resilience and newfound strength. The trial had been grueling, but it had given me the closure I so desperately needed. Laura and I would never be the same, but finally I felt a sense of release. As I poured myself into my work and home renovations, I found a strange sense of peace in the routine. The house, once tainted with memories of hurt, began to feel like a sanctuary, a place that belonged to me alone. Watching the transformation unfold, I found a therapeutic rhythm, a solace in watching the scars of the past fade. My colleagues noticed a change, too. I was more focused, more driven. While the pain still lingered, it was no longer something that defined me. It had become a part of me, something I could control rather than something that controlled me. One evening, as I was wrapping up paperwork at the office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dave, an old friend from high school. He was organizing a get-together for some of our old classmates and wanted to know if I'd join. For a moment, I hesitated, uncertain if I was ready to step back into a social setting. But deep down, I knew it was time to reconnect with the world beyond the remnants of my marriage. The night of the gathering, I walked into the bar, a mix of anticipation and anxiety swirling within me. It had been so long since I'd been out for anything other than work or court dates. But as soon as I saw Dave and the familiar faces of old friends, the tension eased. Dave greeted me with a bear hug, his smile wide. "Tom, man, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" "Better," I admitted, managing a smile of my own. "It's good to see everyone." As the evening wore on, I felt myself relaxing, laughing and swapping stories, reconnecting with parts of myself I'd almost forgotten. It was a release I hadn't realized I needed, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of lightness. At one point, I found myself talking with Sarah, an old classmate who had recently moved back to town. She was warm, easygoing, and kind. For the first time since everything with Laura, I felt a spark of interest, a flicker of curiosity. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night, and in the following weeks, Sarah and I started seeing each other regularly. She was patient and understanding, never pushing me to talk about Laura or the divorce, but always there to listen when I needed to. Our relationship grew slowly, grounded in mutual respect and an easy companionship. Over time, I found myself looking forward to our time together. We went on hikes, explored new restaurants, and even took a weekend trip to the mountains. Each new experience was a step toward healing, a reminder that life could hold joy and beauty again. With Sarah, things felt different. There was no deception, no hidden agendas, just two people enjoying each other's company and building something new. One evening, as we sat on my newly renovated porch, watching the sunset, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Tom, do you ever think about the future? What you want from it?" she asked gently. I looked out at the horizon, her questions settling in. "I do," I said slowly. "I want to keep moving forward, to build a life that makes me happy. I want to let go of the past and focus on the present, and I want to see where this goes," I added, meeting her gaze. She smiled, giving my hand a warm squeeze. "Me too," I think we have something special here, Tom. As I held her hand, a sense of peace washed over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt excited by the possibilities. The pain of Laura's betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about resilience, about forgiveness, and about the importance of living authentically. The divorce had been a painful turning point, but it was a necessary step toward a life that was genuinely my own. I realized I was stronger than I'd ever thought, capable of rebuilding and finding happiness again. In the end, Laura's betrayal had shown me that true happiness starts from within, and that even in the darkest moments, there's a light waiting to guide you forward. With Sarah by my side and a renewed sense of purpose, I knew I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Life after betrayal wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about embracing the little moments, and being open to new possibilities. As I looked into Sarah's eyes, I knew I'd found someone who valued and respected me, someone who wanted to build a life filled with trust, love, and endless possibilities. The journey had been long and challenging, but standing here, on the other side, I saw how each struggle had only made me stronger. I was ready to step into the future, one day at a time, with hope and optimism as my guides. Thank you for joining us for this touching journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you, even brought a little inspiration. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Feel free to share your own experiences or let us know what kinds of stories you'd like to see next. Thanks again for your support. Until then, take care and stay tuned for more great content. Bye-bye.